Welcome to Confessions of a Parent Coach. I'm Coach, mother of four, and potty talker, Ann Kaplan. This is the podcast where I confess something from my own parenting and coaching life, teach a lesson around it, and answer your questions. Even we parenting experts are far from perfect, and the real magic happens when we get down with all that imperfection. We get into the gritty side of parenting here, so earbud up and dive in.
Welcome into another episode of the podcast, everybody. I am so excited to be here with you again this week. And I thought about making this topic actually after a little session that I had with my own coach. And it's a combination of lots of things. And I'm going to kind of kick it off with my confession for you today so you can kind of see where I'm going with it. But really, the topic that we're talking about today, the topic that I named this episode to hopefully encourage people to click and listen and be intrigued, was why I don't have a lot of 20-something clients. But what we're really going to be talking about today is just kind of like the arc of humanity's development, like not humanity since the beginning of time. Sorry, let me rephrase that. The arc of a human's lifetime of development from cradle to all the way into their hopefully live a long, long, long and fulfilling life. What is going on in there? And as I explain all of that stuff to you, I am going to answer the question, why don't I have a lot of 20-something clients? And my confession for you is really something that actually kicked off my sort of exploration into this topic. And it is, and I wonder if this has happened to you before, this experience that I've had several times, maybe many times even over the course of my motherhood, of feeling really maybe remorseful or maybe even ashamed that the stuff I know now, I didn't already have put the work in and done the growth that I needed to do to have that knowledge when my kids were younger. And the most recent time that this happened was um when we were all together for Christmas this year. Yes, I'm a Jew who goes bonker balls for Christmas. Don't get me started on why that is. That's just who I am. So we were all together for Christmas, and my oldest son and my husband and I were sitting around, and my son proposed the question, what was your best Christmas ever? And what was your best Christmas memory? Like what Christmas was your best Christmas? And I said, a couple of years ago, probably more like 5 or 6 years ago at this point, I had a Christmas where it was just me and my kids and Mike and my sister and her husband and their kids. And that was it. And there was no like other extended family. My parents weren't there, any of that stuff. And it was the most relaxed and joyful Christmas that I ever had. And it was because, unfortunately, it was because my parents weren't there. I have a lot of unfinished business when it comes to my childhood, and it makes it almost impossible for me to feel safe and relaxed when I'm around my parents. So, for the first time in 40 years, I had had a Christmas where I felt safe and relaxed, and it was amazing. It was idyllic. And I know it was also like bittersweet at the time because I knew like the stars are not going to align for this to be possible for a really long time again. So we talked about that. And in the course of that conversation, my son asked me, um, you know, why couldn't I be calm and relaxed around my parents or whatever? And we didn't get into all the details or whatever, but he's 20 years old and he's done a lot of his own work, and yet still he wouldn't be eligible to be one of my clients. I don't want to say eligible, but he wouldn't be a good fit to be one of my clients. Even though he's such an evolved 20-year-old, he's still 20. But he said, I know that that's hard for you, mom. And he also said, without the intent of giving me any heartache, but it did give me heartache, was I think one of the side effects of you not feeling safe and relaxed when we were around our grandparents is that you kind of have to keep yourself safe and take care of yourself, which means a lot of like not being in the same room, going and being by yourself, keeping your distance, going and being introverted and stuff like that. And that is a way that I try to take care of myself when I'm feeling really, unsafe. I will just go and have time in my room by myself. It's kind of just take space from whatever the situation is. But, what he also said is like, well, that also really was hard for me because when I was a kid, I was left to kind of deal with them on my own because you couldn't help me because you had to help yourself. And if you are a parent out there, I hope you can imagine how much I simultaneously was like just so proud of him for being able to understand that and put words to it and then actually express that to me. I was really proud of myself that I could hear him say that and I could totally see what he was talking about without like just going into like crazy defensive mode or total just like apologizing, shame spiral. But also, I did feel all of those things that I didn't indulge in those feelings, but I definitely felt just so upset because, this is something I've been working on my whole life. I mean, really, since when I say my whole life, what I really mean is I spent the first part of my life creating all of my protective behaviors to deal with the unsafe feelings that I had around my parents. And I've spent the second part of my life so far trying to heal all of those things so I don't need those protective behaviors anymore. And I am still not there. And I had this like tearful session afterwards where I just said, why did I wait until my third kid was born to start doing this work in earnest? What if I had started when I could have started when I was in college, or I could have started when I was pregnant with my first kid, or before I got married? Like, the parent that my oldest son got is not the parent that my youngest son got. And it's because of all the work I had done you know, in those 9 years in between. And why didn't I start that stuff 9 years sooner so that my oldest son could have gotten the parent that I have become? And maybe, who knows? Maybe I could have even been further along in my stuff by now and all this stuff. So I was really lamenting that and beating myself up and all that stuff. And the answer I got was basically like, that is not possible. You couldn't have done that. First of all, I was 21 years old when I got engaged. I was 5 months pregnant on my first anniversary of my wedding. So I was 25 when Elijah was born, my oldest son. And, it's not possible. Like, you couldn't do this work so what, 9 years before then would have been when I was, oh my gosh, I should have done this math before I started recording. 9 years before then, I would have been 14. You can't start doing the work of dismantling your ego while you're still in the middle of making your ego. You can't do the work of deconstructing this personality that you've constructed when you haven't even constructed it yet. And I really didn't understand that fully until that moment. And that was actually maybe a year or two ago that we had this conversation. Actually, maybe it was only like a year ago, but I have been ruminating on it since then. And it has really flavored some of the conversations I've had with my clients, and definitely flavored the way that I just see my kids and just everybody in the world. And that is kind of exactly what I said when we started the podcast. The arc of human development. It is something that we can't rush, we can't skip, and this like wishing that we could fast forward or be a more evolved version of ourselves at this younger age. It's just not possible. And you might be listening to me right now and thinking, like, yeah, obviously, like, I already know that. This is not earth shattering. You might know it, but I bet that you're showing up in the world based on a totally different perspective plenty of times. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. But let's talk about that arc, that sort of trajectory. You know, when a baby is born into this world, they have a really healthy, intact connection with their higher self or their full self or whatever you want to say. In IFS, we would call it self energy. The Enneagram would call it your essential nature. You're connected to that. And it hasn't been tainted or distorted at all yet. And if you listen to my episode on kids and their bodies back in August, I've already talked about this a little bit in the context of like intuitive eating and the mind body connection and stuff like that. What I'm talking about today is taking that concept to a whole nother level. So, when we come into the world, we have that connection to essential nature, self energy. It's there, and we have lots of other parts of ourselves, of course, but those parts haven't been sort of pulled or pushed out of their healthy alignment yet. And so they're not impeding access to self energy or access to that connection of with essential nature. So then we experience, all of us, this is regardless of what kind of parents you have. So your kids are experiencing this right now, even though I know that you are an amazing, perfect, beautiful parent who hasn't made any mistakes. You're the first one who's ever existed on the planet, but I know it. I know you are. Even your kids have experienced something called a separation wound. And that's not the same as saying an attachment wound. An attachment wound is a more I would say maybe like clinical version of a separation wound, meaning it's something that actually causes like psychological damage and things like that. And most psychoses stem from an attachment wound and all that stuff. We're not going down that rabbit hole today. We're talking about a separation wound. The separation isn't the separation from between parent and child, it's the separation between self and person. So even something as minor as being born and the world is freezing cold and you've never been cold before, or it's really loud, or there's super bright lights, or whatever, you have to get a shot and it hurts, or you're trying to nurse but you can't latch on and so you're hungry. All of the natural, normal experiences of the difference between living in the ether as not a terrestrial being and then being a human being on earth create a disconnection between ourselves and ourselves, basically. Our self, capital S, and our self personality parts, all of that stuff. We lose that connection, and we feel a separation from our essential nature, from our higher self, from self energy. That happens by minute 5, let's say, of life on Earth. And then to the extent which, and I also talked about this a little bit when I talked about codependency last week. So this is the last couple of episodes that I've done they really dovetail well with each other. So I've said some of this stuff already in my last episode. You talk about, the experience of having a separation wound and then having to go forward in life. And what actually happens is that separation gets more and more and more before it gets less and less and less. And that's basically, if I could only just say it in one sentence, that's what I would say, like, being a human is all about: separating from self more and more and more and more until something changes and you start separating from self less and less and less and less. That's it. And then you die. So what does that really look like if we break that down more? Well, you have a childhood where people don't understand you all of the time. It's impossible for any parent to fully 100% instantaneously meet every need that arises inside of their child. So every child will have unmet needs. And that separation becomes more and more, because every time that you feel that discomfort, it's kind of like mind melting to an infant or a toddler or a school age child. It's so uncomfortable or intolerable that we create strategies, habits, um, protective behaviors to soften the blow, to minimize the pain of all of those little separation moments. Could be, like I said, something as minimal as like, I'm hungry and I had to wait 10 minutes before I ate food. Ouch. For a newborn baby, that's an intolerable existential pain that's way, way, way above their ability to cope with. And so, right then and there, a little part of them springs to life to protect them from feeling that before anything as bad as that ever again. Maybe they learn to cry even louder, or maybe they learn to deny their hunger or whatever. It's a newborn baby. Nothing's going to be that concrete yet, but to put it into our adult terms, you have to put words to it. So you get the idea. It could be something when you're a toddler, and I'll tell you a joke my dad played on me, who thought was hilarious, was I was in the bathtub and he brought me an ice cube and he said, "Now, Anne, this is my most precious thing that I've ever owned. I've never shown it to you before because it's so special, but now I trust you that you can take good care of it. Now make sure that you don't lose it. Make sure nothing ever happens to this. And after your bath, I'm going to come back and get it." Well, what happened? Obviously it melted, and my dad came back at the end of my bath and I was devastated that I had lost his precious thing. I was crying, I was so upset. He thought it was a hilarious joke. So that's a great example of of an experience that might pull one of your parts out of alignment, and you might develop a part which is like, don't trust your dad, or you might develop a part that's like, do everything perfectly so no one can ever be upset with you ever again, or don't take on other people's things because you don't want to be responsible for that. Like lots of ways, lots of little part strategies that can develop to protect yourself from the feeling of pain that's way beyond what you have the capacity to cope with when you're a kid. So you can see this is this childhood experience of separating more and more and more. Now, I could tell you a litany of stories that you would just be like, "Oh my God, you poor girl. I can't believe your parents did that." By the way, almost everyone can tell lots of stories that people would have that reaction to. But also, you could talk to someone who doesn't have any of those stories. All their stories could be just perfectly normal, run of the mill, everyday experiences. The truth is that because we are not our kids and we're not inside our kids' heads, we have no idea the things that we're accidentally doing, or that our kids are experiencing when they're not even with us, or they might be thinking about something while they're sitting at the dinner table that we don't even know they're thinking about, that's causing them separation and pain. We don't know. And here's where I go with that. The system is designed that way. That's what's supposed to be happening. The fact that it's not possible for us to do any better than this, I have a very sort of like oh gosh, I don't know what the word is, but I have a very a view of the world that if something is the best that it possibly could be and it's not possible for it to be better, then this must be the way it should be. It's supposed to be this way. This is the way the system was designed. So all of those little pains that our kids are experiencing, they're not little to them, but they're also not wrong, if that makes sense. So all the way through, we go through all of this development until we reach, toddlerhood is a period of extreme individuation and separation from parents in a healthy way. Kids are trying to prove to themselves all of the time that they are separate from their parents, that they can have a self. But when we think of self when we're kids, they're not talking about self like essential nature, higher self energy. They're talking about an identity, a personality. And obviously 2-year olds don't talk about self or identity at all because they don't use those words. But when we talk about like toddlers trying to find their sense of self, they're trying to find their sense of self with a lowercase s. They're trying to prove to themselves that they can be themselves and not be their parent, basically. So we get all of the terrible twos and the 3-year-olds who are just like, no, no, no. And I do it myself. I do it myself, and all of that great stuff. I mean, you can imagine that during that time, if parents are not attuned to that, that could be another time that a lot of parts get pulled in unhealthy directions. In fact, a lot, like when I do IFS work, a lot of our parts are from that early, super early part of childhood. Because think about it, like our brains are exploding, but we don't have the language to understand it. We don't have the experience to understand it. The world does not make any sense to us. Probably daily, something is happening that is just so above your pay grade. So, how could we not be developing all of these ways of navigating this world that is pretty intense and overwhelming? So, and all of those new ways that we're developing, they just all go into that two things. They go into this identity that we're forming, our personality that we're forming, and they also contribute to us becoming more and more separated from our essential nature, from self energy. So, time goes on, blah, 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 blah. Around 9, you may have listened to my podcast a long time ago about the 9-year change. This is the time when 9-year-olds, when like these are like this pre-adolescence chapter is starting, where kids start to realize like I am very separate from the world around me. Last year I didn't care what I wore to school. This year I need to have the right brand of sneakers. Last year I wasn't embarrassed to bring a pull-up with me to a sleepover. This year you better believe you're not sending me to sleepaway camp because I'm mortified if I have an accident. This idea of us being separate from the world around us starts to really solidify. And the 9-year change is when a period of rapid ego development is kicked off that really doesn't stop until like your mid 20s, late 20s even. So all the way from there, then we got adolescence, more and more and more of this separation and identification with the ego. So it's like we're leaving our essential nature behind and becoming more and more and more attached and rigid and identified with our ego instead. Instead of being our true selves, we have decided to become this like facsimile of ourselves. An avatar of ourselves, or like sometimes I'm doing an episode in a couple weeks where I talk about your ego is like your spacesuit. It's this thing that you form throughout your whole childhood so that you can actually survive on planet Earth. The same as if we would need a spacesuit to survive on planet Mars. That's what's happening. But by what happens inside an adolescent and a late adolescent, 20 something year old, all of that stuff before we start to go the other direction is that we think we are our spacesuit. We don't think we're wearing our spacesuit. We think we are our spacesuit. And the metaphor really falls apart because we falsely believe that we need our spacesuit to survive when we really could take it on and off as neat as we want to, and we can survive on planet Earth just having our spacesuit nearby, more like an umbrella than a spacesuit, if that makes sense. So when it's raining, you might have to pull out your ego, but that doesn't mean you need to be completely connected to it all the time. And you certainly don't need to think that you are your spacesuit or your umbrella. So that's just naturally happening inside of us. It's the way the system was designed. It's the way brains work. It's the way age and time work. It's the way hormones work. It's the way the chemistry inside of us works. And that is not because of poor parenting. It's not because of anything that anyone's doing wrong. It just is that way. And then sometime in late 20s, early 30s, and this part doesn't always happen. So everything I've told you already, it's happening, no matter how healthy or unhealthy a kid's childhood is or whatever. But the rest of this might not happen. A person can just stay in the place that they are when they're 25. They can stay super identified with their personality and their ego and believe that that's who they are and not really challenge that or deconstruct that or rewire at all. And there are plenty people who are walking around in the world just like that. When you read like Buddhist texts, or if you read, any of the more modern philosophers like Eckhart Tolle, for example, or Nietzsche, or I don't know, Gurdjieff, all of these people have different words that they use to describe people who are, totally sort of entranced by their ego as asleep, basically. They just spend the rest of their lives sleepwalking. Um, but for a lot of people, that's not where things stop. Something or some something happens either internally or externally in their lives, which helps them decide, this can't be it. This isn't working for me anymore. All of these rigid habits, like, oh, don't do it, don't make any mistakes. Okay, well, that strategy got me really far when I was in elementary school. It's ruining my life right now. Or, don't ever take on any other responsibilities than your own and just mind your own business all the time. Well, okay, that kind of worked for me for a while, but now I have like no friends and no one counts on me, and this isn't actually who I want to be in the world. These strategies don't actually work as well as we want them to. And we have a moment where the whole house of cards just comes crashing down. And that is when we can undertake the work of kind of regaining connection with our essential nature, with our higher selves and self energy and all of that stuff. So now you're thinking about that. Well, how old do you think most of my clients are? Early 30s at the youngest. Most of my clients are, early 30s to 50 years old, 60 years old, even, because this work, we can't really even start it. Just like I found out in that session, you can't really even start this work until you're in your late 30s. So I think I was 28 when I started really in earnest plugging into this stuff. Maybe even older, actually, now that I'm doing the math in my head, maybe like 29 or 30. Anyway, there you go. I'm proving my own point. You just can't start it sooner. You can't start it. You can't do something you're not ready to do until you're ready to do it. That's basically what I'm saying. So most of my clients are really navigating the world almost like brand new because they've decided to look at the world through a new lens. It's brain breaking, it's challenging, it's healing, it's devastating, it's incredible because it just opens up like a whole new world. It's kind of like if you've been sleepwalking your whole life and then you wake up and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't have to live in a dream anymore, which is for most people is a little bit of a nightmare. I'm going to actually live my life and experience fully this beautiful thing that is my time on this planet. So that's why I hardly ever have younger clients. It was really funny because I had this conversation in my session. That was exactly what was told to me as well. Like, I don't really work with people that are younger than that because that's not what I do. Like, that's not the kind of work that I do. And I realized like that was also a little bit of a vote of confidence for me and to be able to own that in my work. Like, that's not the kind of work that I do. Like, if you're looking for someone who's just going to teach you how to get your kids to eat broccoli, that's really, really great. That's when I discovered Love and Logic, was when I was like 25 and made a major difference in my family. I love Love and Logic. I still teach some of those skills with parents when it comes to discipline and stuff like that. But that's like a tiny little sliver of the pie. But if that's the kind of support that a parent is looking for, that and only that, I'm not the right person for them. If you come to me, it's because you want that plus 10 times more stuff. You want that plus let's understand how you got yourself in this pickle in the first place. And what do you want to do about it? And what direction do you want to grow in? And do you really want to look at yourself in the mirror and all of that stuff? And for some people, it's like, ugh, gross. No, thank you, which is totally fair. There's a lot of gross stuff when you look in the mirror sometimes. But for some people, it's like, yes, that is what I'm looking for. And a lot of people are quite surprised when they work with me that that's where we're going. So I hope you can take so much from this podcast episode today. I hope you can take some kindness and grace for yourself, that whatever your child's struggles are, or the fact that your child has struggles, is not because you're, you know, messing up, that life for your child is supposed to include that. It's how they can progress and develop themselves and pursue this whole path of development. And if you are doing the things that we talk about on this podcast all the time, or if you're my client, the stuff that we talk about in sessions or that you've read about in your workbook and stuff like that, what you're doing is equipping your child so that when that moment comes where they finally are ready to start, shifting back toward self, they have some really great tools and a running start. And that's really all we can do as parents. Try our best not to exacerbate that whole separation process. Try our best to equip our kids so they have that head start when it's time for them to start deconstructing their egos, and just love them the whole time. And that's it. I mean, that's really it. Isn't that so easy? I don't know why anyone struggles with parenting. It's so easy. I just told you what to do. Just kidding. One. So that's my lesson for you this week. I hope that it was really helpful for you. I hope you can give yourself some grace in your parenting. I hope you can also kind of realize the depth of what's possible for you in work with somebody like me or with me. And if that does really intrigue you, set up that free discovery call you hear me talk about every week. It's always waiting for you in the show notes or in your email. And I can't wait to talk to you soon and hear all about the trajectory you want to go on, how you want to dismantle this constructed personality that you've made for yourself, and see what's on the other side of all of that. Have a great week, everyone, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye.
The episode is over, but there's more waiting for you. You can grab my free workbook, Getting Kids to Listen the First Time, that walks you through the fundamental principles I teach all of my clients and applies them to this very universal parenting challenge. So if you're sick of repeating yourself all day long or just want to learn more about my style, you'll definitely want to go to bit.ly/kidswholisten. And if you're ready to work with me, let's meet. Set up a free call at bit.ly/Kaplan call, and let's create an action plan that gets you exactly where you want to go. And of course, links to all this goodness are in the show notes. Thanks for joining, and I'll see you next time.